as COVID-19 pandemic continues on and there's continued changes in unemployment benefits and status of unemployed individuals in Michigan and across the U.S., that's certainly going to have a big impact on our business community. And joining us now to talk about the many impacts of those situations is Michael Greiner. He's a professor of management in the School of Business Administration at Oakland University. Michael, thanks for being with us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate having you on. So let's talk first about the unemployment benefits, because we've heard so much debate over the past several months about a staffing shortage, so to speak, as one part of the narrative. And the other is that people don't want to go back to jobs where they're getting paid less than a living wage, where they're having to work 2-3 jobs to make ends meet, and the ends still don't meet. And now, with the unemployment benefits going away, on one side of the spectrum, you would think some of those incentives to go back into the workplace would be coming back into play. And on the other side, you're seeing a situation where people's hands are being forced and they're going to have to explore the job market, which, mind you, has plenty of openings available, but may not be the most preferable for their situation, especially now that they're losing that added padding from unemployment. How do you think, just on a blanket scale, the absence of these unemployment benefits is going to impact both these businesses and individual employees that may be exploring going back into the workplace?
Well, I think the businesses, it's going to have relatively little impact, is the truth of the matter. And the reason we know that is that we have a situation where certain states had eliminated the extended benefits earlier. So we could kind of see what happened there and compare them to what happened in the states that did not eliminate the expanded benefits, like Michigan. And as it turns out, the states that did eliminate the benefits had really no faster growth than we did in the other states. And in fact, many of them had actually slower growth than we did in the states that kept the unemployment benefits. So it doesn't appear like there's going to be any kind of huge impact. And really, the idea that the reason people aren't working is because of these unemployment benefits, I think, is really overstated. The evidence really seems to suggest that. Now, in terms of individuals, I think the bigger concern is the fact that a lot of people have been counting on this income to pay their bills. As you point out, a lot of people have been struggling over the past few years, certainly since the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. We've seen very slow income growth among most families, and that has really hurt people. You know, people feel like they're not making progress and feel like things are getting more expensive, and they're right, because they aren't making progress the way they had in the past. And I think that this cut in benefits is going to hurt some people. And the bigger issue, I think, is it's going to hurt the ability of families to spend money, which then also has an impact on the economy, a negative impact. And I think that's part of why you've seen a negative impact on the economy in some of these states that cut the unemployment benefits earlier.
We're joined by Michael Greiner, professor of management in the School of Business Administration at Oakland University. And so, Michael, there's been some reports that there's 10 million jobs for about 8 million unemployed, and yet they're still really slow to fill, even though we are slightly into the period after these unemployment benefits had gone away. Why are these jobs continuing to seemingly be so tough for these employers to fill, even despite there being a rash of jobs open, more than there are unemployed individuals?
Well, you know, people are not what we call fungible in economics, which means you can't exchange one for the other. So having a job available doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to suit everybody who's out there looking for a job. There's this process of matching up the correct person with the correct job. And that's really where I think things are lacking right now in the economy. It's kind of like the whole issue that we're dealing with the supply chains. You know, right now they're having trouble getting semiconductors to manufactured and getting them to where they need to be. And there's this issue with there being too many of the containers in one place, not being in the place where they're supposed to be. The problem is we shut down this massive economy that was running at full tilt for a long time, as if it just on a dime. And as a result of that, it's hard to restart these things. People in many cases spent 2 years off, and during that time they may have started a business, they may have gone back and tried to get more education, their lives may have changed, they may have moved, they may have decided to change careers. There are lots of things that could have happened that made it suddenly where they're not just willing to drop back into that same job that they left 2 years ago. And the other issue too, I think, and this is really something that I was just reading about this morning, is that once again, with the rise of the Delta variant in COVID, we're seeing again where a lot of these businesses are starting to shut down, especially some of the businesses associated with office space, some of the business travel. The airlines are talking about cutting again, and so people really are not as comfortable simply relying on an employer to provide for them as they had been in the past. In many cases, they're saying, I need to rely on myself rather than waiting for this employer to take care of me.
We're joined by Michael Greiner, professor of management in the School of Business Administration at Oakland University, with us today on the MegaCast. And the Delta variant also taking a toll on the economy and certainly taking a toll on some unemployed individuals that may have been exploring getting back into the workplace. What, from your indications and your expertise, seems to be the overarching impact of the Delta variant and the current COVID-19 surge, so to speak, on a national level and here in Michigan in particular, on getting workers back into the workplace?
Well, I think that the big issue, and really the biggest thing that government can do right now to get people working again, is to deal with the pandemic. We saw a very direct relationship between the vaccination starting and really making progress there with the economy starting to get back on track. And it's actually amazing the last couple months prior to this one, where we were adding about 1 million jobs a month. So that's really very impressive. And it shows that the economy was bouncing back very quickly. Now, we had it slow again this month, and it's believed that that's largely as a result of the rise of the Delta variant. So I think that, again, we're seeing where offices are again saying that they're not going to have businesses returning to them as they had been in the past, and that has kind of a waterfall effect, where if businesses aren't returning to the workers to the offices, then those workers then aren't going and using the restaurants that are located downtown. They aren't necessarily using the parking structures. They aren't necessarily driving, using as much gasoline. And so there's this effect that then goes throughout the entire economy, just from the fact that people aren't being called back to the office. And I was just reading yesterday about how business travel, where they had really hoped that would be bouncing back, that it appears to be stalling again. So really the priority number one of the president and the policymakers needs to be getting this Delta variant under control. And that's where I think really the biggest story from an economic standpoint right now is the fact that the president is really pushing to increase the vaccine mandates in businesses. And I think that will, if there's anything that will have a long-term impact on the economy and getting people back to work, that is it.
We're joined by Professor Michael Greiner. He is a professor of professor of management in the School of Business Administration at Oakland University, with us on the MegaCast today. And Professor, as we continue forward with this and we continue to have this debate on the unemployment issue, on trying to get workers back into the workplace and what may lead one thing to another, and how the impact of the unemployment situation may impact the economy going forward. What do you believe, from your expertise, from your analysis on this issue and a number of different COVID-related issues as it pertains to our business community, what do you think will turn the tide that does get people back into the workplace and kicks this economy back into high gear? Certainly solving the issues of the pandemic, but are there any other factors at play that you believe would really turn the tide and start to get people going back into the workplace?
Well, I think that certainly dealing with the pandemic really is the central issue. But I guess if I had to look at another factor, the thing that I think is going to be really interesting to watch are businesses themselves pushing forward the mandates within their workforce. I think that businesses are really ultimately going to be the drivers in terms of getting people vaccinated. The reason is it's just good for business. Look at the example of the cruise companies, where they're involved in a fight right now with the governor of Florida. Florida. And the reason is because they say they want to mandate people on the cruises are vaccinated, and the governor of Florida doesn't want to allow them to require that. Well, the reason they want to require that is people who've been vaccinated don't want to go on a cruise with people who haven't been vaccinated. They're worried about getting the variant. So they want to be in a safe place where people are protected. So I think what you're going to see is more and more companies, if they're not requiring their people to get vaccinated, they're going to be doing things like we saw Delta Airlines, where they're going to be increasing the costs on people who are not vaccinated. And that really, I think, is ultimately going to be the thing that kind of pushes us over the finish line. It's not going to be a government mandate. This issue is has become too much politicized at this point, but ultimately it's going to be business who are saying this is bad for business. We need to get people vaccinated. And that's really what's ultimately going to get us through this crisis, I think.
We're joined by Michael Greiner. He's a professor of management in the School of Business Administration at Oakland University, joining us today talking about the job situation in the state of Michigan and federally, about the economy as it pertains to COVID-19. And as we're looking at all these issues and as we're considering the many factors that are at play with each of these individual issues and then how they connect together, the big underlying thought is, where does the economy go from here? Because this pandemic doesn't seem to have the light at the end of the tunnel that we necessarily saw a few months ago when cases were at a lower rate, when they were not increasing in the majority of the states in the union. And now we have a completely different situation. So as we're going forward with the Delta variant, with other variants that will continue to pop up as we struggle to get more people in the U.S. and here in the state of Michigan vaccinated, what do you see on the forecast for the economy going forward? Are we going to continue to see kind of this slow resurgence that we've seen more recently, or it's kind of that boom that we saw a few months ago? Or could we be running toward a situation where we should be expecting things to be a little bit more turbulent and going back and forth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the short-term forecast is definitely for unpredictable weather right now, and the reason is because we don't know what's going to be happening with these variants, and we don't know if there could be a new variant that emerges. That's the scary thing about this: is as COVID has been bouncing around, there are new mutations that can evolve, and you never know how that's going to impact things. But I think that what you're seeing in many cases, really, and this is a credit, I think, to the American people, is the resilience of the American economy and the American workforce, where they're saying, you know, I'm going to kind of take control of this situation and take control of my life and try to find some innovative ways to deal with this. One thing that we've seen a big jump up over the past couple of years has actually been new business startups, where there was a big concern since really, again, the Great Recession, that the dynamism, what we call the dynamism in our economy, where the amount of new business startups had actually slowed. And that's a big concern, because that's really where the innovation and the energy in our economy comes from. But what we're seeing now is that has restarted, and we have really seen historic levels of new business startups. And I think that that level of entrepreneurship is really what ultimately is going to help people get through this. And you know, I think kind of the American people, as we always do, going back and relying on ourselves and relying on our communities, I think we'll get through this.
We're joined by Professor Michael Greiner, professor of management at the School of Business Administration at Oakland University. Professor, just another minute with you before we'll say goodbye today. Is there anything else that would be important or interesting for our audience to know about the economic forecast, about the jobs situation going forward, or things that we should be paying attention to in the coming weeks and months?
Well, if there are two things I think that I would be paying attention to, number one would be what Congress does. Because while I said that there isn't much government can do, there is one thing government can do, and that's spend money, because they can essentially insert money into the economy. And so the question is, if they pass this infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is supposed to cost about $1 trillion over the next 10 years or so. And then there's also talk about another large bill that would be passed through the reconciliation process of about another $3.5 trillion. If those bills pass, then you'll see a lot of money coming into the economy that would be creating new jobs. So that, I think, could be potentially very exciting and could have a big impact in the long run. The other question will be what the Fed does, because, of course, the Fed is the other big arm that can have a big impact on the economy. And if they start to really tighten up the monetary supply out of fears of inflation, which personally I think are a little bit overstated, but nevertheless, I mean, there are concerns about it. If they start to do that, then that could really choke off a recovery before we're able to make progress in it. So I think really the right now the smart money is to watch what Congress does and what the Fed does over the next couple of months, because in the long run, those could be the biggest things that impact our long-term economic viability.
Well, Professor, we appreciate your time and your analysis of the current state of our economy or the current state of our job market, both for employers and for those that are unemployed or looking to go back into the job market here soon. Thank you for your insight. We appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.